This is the secret American plan of 1945. It can be understood that the United States wanted to destroy the 20 largest cities of the Soviet Union with pinpoint nuclear strikes. The plan was developed immediately after the Potsdam Conference to intimidate the USSR. However, in reality, this plan was an American bluff. After dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan, the United States simply did not have enough nuclear fuel left to rapidly create new warheads and massively bomb the Soviet Union. But to attack and defend, both countries mobilized all available resources, technologies, scientists, spies, and all this for one goal: to develop as many bombs, planes, rockets, and computing capabilities in the most extensive arms race in history. Soon after, other countries will join this race. They will also want to acquire technologies and weapons that can not only destroy all living things but also protect, deter neighbors, and provide a huge amount of peaceful energy. Over the past 78 years, more than 2,000 nuclear explosions have occurred on Earth, but only 2 of them were combat in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All the others are test ones. As you can see, our planet is still alive. But history also remembers very serious trials. For example, the famous explosion of the Soviet Tsar Bomba. On October 30th, 61st, Soviet pilots dropped an 8-meter shell weighing 26.5 tons by parachute over the New Earth archipelago. At an altitude of 4,000 meters above sea level, this bomb will explode. The flash from the explosion can be seen 1,000 kilometers away in Norway, Greenland, and Alaska. There won't be anything left alive within a 55-kilometer radius. In a village on Dixon Island, which is located almost 800 kilometers from the epicenter, windows will fly out. But the most impressive thing is the largest nuclear mushroom in history. It will rise above the stratosphere to a height of 67 kilometers. Everest, just in case, is 8,848 meters. Impressive sizes, aren't they? This is the so-called nuclear 9 countries that officially or effectively possess nuclear weapons. Essentially, it is the presence of nuclear weapons that deters states from engaging in a full-scale Third World War. Take a look at the map. Countries without territorial disputes are marked in green, while those with issues with neighboring countries over certain territories are marked in red. And as you understand, land division is one of the main reasons to start any war in history. But how is it that these 9 countries ended up with nuclear weapons? The Americans will be the first to test an atomic bomb. In July 1945, the Trinity bomb will be detonated in the state of New Mexico. The USSR developed its own nuclear weapons. Only 4 years later, the RDS-1 bomb was tested at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. The third nuclear power will be the United Kingdom, testing its warhead on the Montebello Islands near Australia. In the 1960s, France tested nuclear weapons, detonating a bomb codenamed Blue Jerboa in the Sahara Desert. These lands now belong to Algeria. The fifth nuclear power became China, conducting a bomb test in 1964 at the Lop Nor test site. Then followed India in 1974, Pakistan in 1998, North Korea in 2006. Why only these 9 countries? It's simple, it's terribly complex. In fact, any warhead or nuclear reactor is based on the radioactive element, uranium. But the current world leaders in uranium mining, Kazakhstan, Namibia, Canada, and Australia, do not possess nuclear weapons. Why? It's all because in order for uranium to be used in a nuclear reactor or converted into plutonium for nuclear weapons, a multitude of complex processes need to be carried out. In other words, the raw material needs to be turned into fuel. This requires technological capabilities, engineering schools, and huge financial resources. Additionally, countries that already possess nuclear weapons are not interested in their competitors acquiring them. Please note, at different times, sanctions will be imposed on Iran with its nuclear program. The ambitions of Iraq and Saddam Hussein will be blown to pieces, and the same fate will befall Libya. But North Korea, heavily restricted from head to toe, will still get its bomb because for Kim Jong-un and his predecessors, it's a matter of life and death. This helped them avoid the fate of Hussein and the Libyan leader Gaddafi, because when you are left without nuclear protection, you face invasion and overthrow by larger countries. But let's go back to the mid-20th century. Why did the United States get nuclear weapons first, rather than Germany? After all, it was German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann who split the nucleus of the uranium atom. And this means that now you can extract a huge amount of energy from it and, as history shows, create such explosions or generate a lot of cheap electricity. Here is the key element of the era: uranium-235. Why 235? Because in its core there are 92 protons and 143 neutrons, and the force that holds these guys together is one of the most powerful in nature. The atom is under incredible tension, but adding just one additional neutron to it causes the nucleus to instantly break into pieces and release energy and new neutrons. These neutrons each other uranium-235 nuclei, causing new fissions. Even more energy and more free neutrons are released. One nucleus divides into 2, then into 4, 8, 16, and in just a few moments it decays into quintillion atoms. This is the very chain reaction. How can we compare its energy effect? Imagine that just 1 gram of uranium releases as much energy as 3 tons of coal or 2.5 tons of oil. This is incredibly cost-effective and practical. Of all the uranium on the planet, uranium-235 makes up only 0.72%. The rest is stable uranium-238, which is suitable for neither reactors nor nuclear weapons. How can we solve this problem? This is where the process of uranium enrichment comes into play. Through this complex, energy-intensive, and costly process, uranium-238 is transformed into the more active uranium-235. In 1939, Germany began a secret uranium project to create the world's first atomic bomb. By that time, Hitler had already occupied Austria and Czechoslovakia, and soon invaded Poland. Scientists understood that if this cutting-edge weapon fell into the aggressor's hands, defeating Germany would be virtually impossible. Albert Einstein, already emigrated to the States, in the same 39th writes a letter to American President Roosevelt. Uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate futures. This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. A single bomb of this type, carried by boat and exploded in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. In view of this situation, you may think it desirable to have some permanent contact maintained between the administration and the group of physicists working on chain reactions in America. Roosevelt will listen to Einstein's advice, and Americans will rush to develop their own bomb. The code name for this secret project is Manhattan. About 130,000 people will be involved. Dozens of new enterprises will be organized, and a whole closed city will be built in the desert, where the best scientists and engineers will live with their families. Dozens of Nobel laureates will contribute to the creation of the American bomb. However, the question arises where to get uranium, which previously was not of particular interest. An interesting fact, the first 3 American bombs will be almost 100% assembled from African uranium ore. This is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was a Belgian colony until 1960. Local black workers extract ore from their own subsoil for a penny for civilized Europeans. For example, at the Shinkolobwe mine, they extract radioactive radium, discovered by Marie Curie in 1898, and becoming the most expensive metal of the early 20th century. In 1906, 1 gram of radium was valued at $175,000 or 265 kilograms of gold. Naturally, they want to make money on radium, so the local workers toil all year round in an African mine at a temperature of 40 degrees in the shade, often becoming disabled or dying from radiation sickness. The reason is that they are literally pulling uranium ore with 65% uranium oxide content out of the ground with their bare hands. Remember this figure. Uranium ores are classified into poor ores with uranium content less than 1%, average, rich and super rich ores with content over 1%. In Congo, they then found a real miracle ore with a uranium content of 65%. But when the Belgians discovered this uranium deposit, uranium itself was of little interest. They were looking for radium, and there is only about 333 milligrams of radium per ton of uranium. Therefore, they amused themselves with the remaining uranium as they could. They used it to produce paints for porcelain, glass of various colors. Some of the uranium ore was exported to Belgium, and eventually it ended up with Hitler and his nuclear scientists when he occupied Belgium in 1940. This is what Einstein writes to Roosevelt. The United States has only a small amount of uranium. Valuable deposits are in Canada and Czechoslovakia. Significant sources are in the Belgian Congo. And it was what was left in Africa that would eventually be exported to the United States for the Manhattan Project. In fact, the Germans and Americans started with roughly the same amount of Congolese ore, 1,250 tons each. But why is it the United States that is succeeding? The fact is, American scientists rely on graphite in their experimental reactors, which is essential for a controlled chain reaction. Meanwhile, the Germans are experimenting with heavy deuterium water, and the only plant for its production at the time is operating in occupied Norway. In 1943, the British finally destroy it. By the way, when the Soviet Union starts assembling its bomb in 1945, the country will have no African ore. Therefore, it will have to organize large-scale uranium production from scratch, both domestically and throughout Europe. The first Soviet RDS-1 will be made of 60% German uranium, 20% Czech uranium, 3% Polish uranium, and only the remainder from the USSR itself. As I mentioned before, the uranium ore itself is not of great significance. What is important is the ability to effectively enrich uranium. Let's take a look at who is the leader in this field today. It is no coincidence that Russia occupies the leading positions. It was in the late 1940s that the country developed unique technologies that have not been replicated by anyone to this day. One of the key elements of these technologies were the special chromium-plated needles manufactured at the Vladimir gramophone record plant from synthetic corundum, the second hardest mineral in the world. These needles, initially intended for extracting sound from gramophone records, were later used in the most complex and powerful uranium centrifuges created by Soviet scientists. Among these scientists was Viktor Sergeyev, who stood at the origins of the creation of the world's largest uranium enrichment industry. He proposed the use of corundum needles in the centrifuges, as no other materials could withstand the insane rotation with radioactive uranium inside. Another Soviet scientist, Joseph Friedlander, known as a genius of alloys, developed the casings and components of these centrifuges, capable of withstanding extreme conditions of pressure, temperature, and radiation. Over 70 years, the USSR Russia has developed 10 generations of such gas centrifuges. Enriched uranium is used both for the production of nuclear weapons with an enrichment concentration of about 90% and for the needs of nuclear power with enrichment up to 4%. This Russian-enriched uranium is actively purchased today by many countries, including the United States, the Netherlands, Germany, the United Kingdom, and France. In 2022 alone, the United States purchased $644 million worth of Russian uranium, and the Netherlands $569 million. It's understandable, as there are currently around 400 nuclear reactors operating in the world, and their main task is to generate cheap electricity as cheaply as possible. In this context, Russian-enriched uranium becomes the most sought after due to the scale of production and advanced technologies. Now let's take another look at the approximate number of nuclear warheads held by countries. It's important to understand that nuclear warheads have a limited shelf life, averaging between 30 and 45 years. This is due to the instability of uranium, which continues to decay even inside the warhead. When the concentration of uranium-235 decreases, the warhead may either fail to detonate when needed or, conversely, explode when it shouldn't. Practically all the nuclear warheads accumulated by the United States during the Cold War era require replacement. But no American company enriches uranium. The United States once dominated this market, but a whirlwind of historical factors, including the deal to purchase enriched uranium from Russia, has advanced Russia's civilian nuclear program since the collapse of the USSR and allowed Russia to capture half of the global market. The United States, on the other hand, has completely ceased uranium enrichment. And now there will be a key moment in history, the so-called HU-LU deal. What is HU? This is the highly enriched uranium-235 for weapons. And LU is the low-enriched 4% uranium for power plants. What was the deal? The Soviet Union has collapsed, and countries are reducing the number of warheads. But you can't just throw them away. And why should you, when the highly enriched fuel can be reprocessed at Russian facilities and used for the needs of American commercial power plants? Let me remind you that the US has the most of them. This is exactly what the impoverished Russia of the 90s and enterprising Americans agree on. One urgently needs money for the budget, the other needs cheap uranium. In the end, Russia will earn $17 billion from this agreement, 13 of which will go to the budget through tax deductions. But what is more important in this story is that the country will utilize its most important uranium enrichment facilities. They will bring profits, save jobs, and retain unique specialists. It is important to understand that any military nuclear program is inherently unprofitable, and in order to maintain it, we need permanently working capacities of the peaceful atom. The case of North Korea is quite telling here. Back in the day, Soviet specialists helped the country build a research reactor in Yongbyon, which later became the foundation for the Korean nuclear bomb. But nowadays, nuclear power plants already exist in 32 countries around the world, with 3 more currently under construction. So the question arises, could each of these countries create nuclear weapons? Theoretically, yes. But in practice, there's the International Atomic Energy Agency that monitors the operations of nuclear plants in different countries to ensure all developments are strictly for peaceful purposes. Otherwise, you end up like Iran, try to build your own atomic bomb, you get hit with harsh sanctions, or like North Korea, where they will simply throw the IAEA inspectors out of the country. Another important point is that in some countries, like Turkey and Egypt, the nuclear plants aren't even built by the countries themselves, they're built by Russia's Rosatom under a build-own-operate model. So Russia not only constructs the plant, but also owns it, services it, and controls all the dangerous technologies and nuclear fuel. Currently, there are 9 countries in the world that for various reasons may or aspire to acquire nuclear weapons. These include Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Ukraine, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Brazil. Some of them have the technical potential, threats to their own security, and means of delivering nuclear weapons. The ideal in this regard is the famous nuclear triad aircraft, missiles, and submarines. Let's start with Japan and South Korea. They have excellent technical potential. Look at the map. Both countries build and maintain dozens of nuclear power units. Japan can also enrich uranium on its own, and it already has 46 tons of plutonium. It is extracted from the operating reactor and theoretically can be used to make a bomb. Japan and Korea also have ballistic cruise missiles that can potentially fire warheads. So what is stopping these countries? The fact that they are under the US nuclear umbrella. That is, there is no real security threat from China or North Korea, so they will only have to spend resources and money if the US suddenly decides to leave the region. Taiwan has a similar story. They have their own reactors, missiles, and submarines, but there is no particular need to accelerate, as they are currently protected by the United States. Ukraine. We will not discuss the security threat. After the collapse of the USSR, 1,700 nuclear warheads were located on Ukrainian territory. But in 1994, Ukraine will renounce the Soviet nuclear weapons. However, even after that, it retains means of delivery, equipment, its own uranium reserves, technologies, and specialists who could theoretically engage in a nuclear bomb. But then the main thing will be missing production capacities and free money to create this bomb or even maintain the existing nuclear charges. It is reported that by 1993, the warranty period of some of them had expired and storing them had become unsafe. Turkey and Saudi Arabia. These two countries are vying for the status of leader of the Islamic world, and in it, the bomb is currently only possessed by Pakistan. However, Turkey has uranium reserves, its own ballistic missiles, and nuclear research centers. But for Turkey to secretly develop a bomb is tantamount to suicide, since 62% of its economy is foreign trade. Thus, any international sanctions will simply strangle the country and its leader, Erdogan. Turkey is a member of NATO and is under the nuclear protection of the United States, regardless of the current state of relations between these countries. Saudi Arabia has a different history. It is summed up by a quote from the former foreign minister of the kingdom: "If Iran acquires nuclear capabilities, we will do everything possible to achieve the same." One of the champions in the search for adventure and sanctions is Iran. The country has an operational nuclear power plant, its own uranium mining and processing, and research centers with strong physicists and nuclear scientists. By all accounts and ambitions, Iran is the main candidate to turn the nuclear 9 into a 10. It's no coincidence that they've been under sanctions for so many years. Another potential candidate is Brazil, the largest country in South America. It is the regional leader in military spending and possesses all the technologies of the full nuclear fuel cycle. Moreover, in 2008, Brazil purchased 4 French diesel-electric submarines with technology transfer in order to develop its own nuclear-powered submarine. This step may be related to Brazil's desire to strengthen its naval capabilities. Why? Just look at who the world leaders are in the number of submarines. North Korea is clearly not building all those submarines for tourists. They must quickly deliver nuclear warheads to the shores of their enemies. But if we go back to Brazil's enemies, then most likely it's corruption, carelessness, and poverty. Therefore, trying to create nuclear weapons at the risk of your own economy is not a good idea. Well, what about the fear of global nuclear war? There are many models and assumptions about what could happen in the event of such a war. One of the most frightening scenarios is the so-called nuclear winter. What is it? Imagine that after numerous nuclear explosions, a huge amount of smoke and soot enters the Earth's atmosphere, blocking the sun. As a result, the planet experiences a sharp drop in temperature, like in the Arctic. This would be followed by famine and conventional wars for access to resources. Another serious fear is radiophobia, the fear of an invisible but deadly enemy that kills meanly and unnoticeably. The examples of Fukushima and Chernobyl have clearly shown how devastating the consequences of radioactive contamination can be. Miners in Congo, rescuers in Ukraine, and even Marie Curie herself, who discovered radium, died from radiation sickness. The Chernobyl disaster was that 180 tons of radioactive fuel were instantly ejected from the reactor. In a nuclear bomb, there are much less of such materials, only tens of kilograms. Moreover, the radiation spike occurs directly at the moment of the explosion. If the explosion occurs in the air, the radiation background will no longer be catastrophically dangerous for life in a few days, and in years and decades such places can be quite livable, as in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Furthermore, during the Soviet era, a harsh nuclear experiment was conducted under the leadership of Marshal Zhukov. On September 14, 1954, a nuclear bomb was detonated at the Totsk training ground in the Orenburg region. And literally within a couple of hours, tens of thousands of soldiers, along with military equipment, went on a training attack through the contaminated area. These exercises, codenamed Snowball, were intended to prove that even in the conditions of a nuclear war, the conventional war of army against army would not be cancelled. But for me, this proves that it is not nuclear weapons that we need to be afraid of. Look, there are very important words written on the memorial to the victims of the nuclear bombing in Hiroshima: "Sleep tight, the mistake won't be repeated." I really want everyone who touches any weapon, not just nuclear weapons, to remember this. If this content was interesting to you, don't forget to react to it and tell your friends. See you soon.